Welcome. And Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu L'asot B'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So, of course, we are just at the end now of this conversation that Judah has had with Jacob, and Jacob has acquiesced, and he is going to send down Benjamin with a lot of trepidation about this, because as far as he's concerned, he's lost two other sons already. So, Vayikhu ha'anashim et hamincha hazot, and the men took this gift, umishne chesef lakhu bi'adam, and the double money, right, the double amount of money they took in their hands, ve'et Binyamin, and Benjamin. Vayakumu, they arose, vayerdu Mitzrayim, and they went down to Egypt, vayamdu lifnei Yosef, and they stood before Joseph. So again, some sort of stylistic niceties there, I would say. Let's take a look. Yes, David.
Yeah. So I get the okay. Just a quick question. So it's Judah, of course. Now, who else has gone with him, though? I mean, it's a bunch of servants, and who else went with him on this thing?
The brothers.
So
all the brothers are going.
Okay, everybody's going. Okay. Thanks.
Right. Of course. So now Jacob has to watch all his children heading down. Okay, basically all his sons, his remaining sons, heading down to Egypt. So he's going to be left by himself while they go down. And of course, there's no internet, no WhatsApp, no other communications. He's going to have to wait and find out what happens, what transpires. So Rashi has some comments that are more on the grammatical side. And again, they're there for us to puzzle a little bit as to what motivated Rashi to feel that he needed to include these things. And one thing we should know about Rashi is he doesn't waste a single drop of ink. Okay, I mean everything he writes is done in a very purposeful, and considered way. So here we go. The et Binyamin and Benjamin. Betargaminan v'dabru bat yat Binyamin. So we look and we see that they use a different word for Benjamin, right? So let's take a look. Here we go. Right, here it is. Udvaru yat Binyamin. So it says on the double money, had trade, one twice, kaspa, their money, nesivu, that's the verb he uses here. And then it says v'devaru yat Binyamin. And he uses the word devaru. He doesn't say nesiv. Right here, he says unesivu guvraya yat tikrufta, and the men took the gift, right? And nesivu, and devaru. So Rashi is pointing out the fact that for some reason, when it's talking about taking Benjamin, the Aramaic uses a different verb, and that's what he's going to talk about. So here we go, and he talks about the subtlety of it, and it could be that Rashi feels that we should be aware of these things, the difference between taking an object and taking a person. Right? There's that Aramaic takes into account the subtlety of that. So, metargaminan v'dabru yat Binyamin. So the word davar means sort of they persuaded Benjamin, they led Benjamin. And I've pointed out that the word davar, which can mean a thing or a matter or a word, can also refer to a cattle prod. In other words, how you lead cattle, how you convince cattle that they need to move along. So just interesting, right? The the persuasive qualities or the influence of words, how the language itself, how Hebrew, and in this case Aramaic, is picking up how words matter and being specific how they matter. Why? Lefi she'en lekichat hakesef, because taking the money, or lekichat ha'adam, and taking a person, shaveh, b'lashon arami, that in the Aramaic language, that they're not considered the same. B'davar hanakat b'yad, when it comes to something that one takes with one's hand, something you pick up and take, metargaminan unasiv, that we would translate as unasiv, which means literally they carried. The davar hanikach hanhagat dvarim, but something that is taken through words, right, through persuasion, metargaminan v'davar, that we translate with v'davar. And of course, we know that the word ledaber means to speak. So just an interesting, almost side note on the part of Rashi. Going on, next verse. Vayar Yosef itam et Binyamin. Joseph saw with them Benjamin, saw Benjamin with them. Vayomer la'asher al beito, and he said to the one over his household, in other words, his supervisor, Havei et hanashim habaita, bring the men into the house, to the house. Utvoach tevach v'hachein, and let fresh meat be slaughtered. Right? Tvoach tevach has to do with preparing meat. And hachein has to do, so this has to do with the tet, the letter tet and the word letter zayin are actually connected, right? Ta, za. If you say those two letters, you'll see they both come out of the same part of your mouth, right?
But I don't think they do. You said this before, and every time you say these kinds of things, I test it.
Okay,
and when
so
I do
where do you
t,
say
my tongue, when I do t, my
Yes.
tongue starts at the roof of my mouth.
Right.
And when I do z, it does not touch the roof of my mouth at all.
I understand, but is your tongue position not right behind your front teeth?
When I do t, it is.
Okay, and when you do a z, is it not also right behind the front teeth?
Okay, yeah, they are. They're
Okay.
not the same position, but you're right. They are behind the front teeth.
Right, and so they're basically both dentals.
Okay.
And for that
Thanks for
reason,
clearing that up.
so zevach, no, I appreciate you doing that. So zevach lisboach, right, which means to slaughter, and tevach are related words. They're related. So actually, Samson Raphael Hirsch, I may have mentioned this already, has a whole theory of language, Hebrew language, based on how words that come from the same part of the mouth essentially are related in some way or another. And he does that. He has a really, may I call it a scientific analysis of that. So prepare, hachein means to prepare. Ki iti yochlu, for with me, yochlu, they will eat. Ha'anashim, the men will eat. But sohorayim, at noon. So Rashi on this. Utvoach tevach v'hachein. So again, Rashi is looking at the fact that it's not a command, that actually the way the Hebrew is written is, and that's why I translated it as let it happen, as opposed to slaughter meat and prepare it, right? So again, maybe a subtle distinction, but there's a reason for it. And that, again, understanding that the way we look at the actual language of the Bible is with a magnifying glass. And we assume that the reason why that it's been perfected, that is the language of the Bible has been perfected, and that there's a great deal of thought that's gone into the actual way in which sentences are constructed and set out for us. So he says, Kamo velitboach tevach ulahachein. He says it's as if he's saying to prepare meat, right, or to slaughter meat and prepare it, as not, and that it's not. He's saying it isn't saying slaughter command. It's simply an infinitive. Ve'ein tavoach lashon tzivui, and the word tavoach, right, tavoach, it is not, does not have the connotation or the denotation of a command. Shaya lolomor utvoach, right? So this, if it had been saying, so this says utvoach, maybe it would say, yeah, tvach. It would have said tvach, like shlach, right? Send, shlach, tvach, slaughter. So instead of tavoach, that's an infinitive form. So again, Rashi may just be drawing to our attention the language. Yes?
Doesn't in modern Hebrew they just use the future tense as as a command?
Give me an example, Judith.
Well,
Can you
that's just how I've heard it used. That doesn't mean that it isn't, that they do it in the Torah or that's a formal way of
No, I
speaking.
understand. I'm just trying to understand even the modern Hebrew context. It could be a polite form of imperative.
I think an infinitive can be a command.
Yeah, right. Well, here is the way it's working. Right here, it is an infinitive, but it's not a direct command. In other words, I think the way we might say it is as let it happen. Let it, a more gentle way of giving a command. But again, what's the deeper meaning involved here? I'm not sure. Just that's what he's saying. Going on with the sentence, but Tzohorayim, which would mean at noon. And again, Rashi looks like he's looking very carefully at the Targum. And of course, the reason why the Targum was written to begin with is because the Jews in Babylonia had basically weren't speaking Hebrew to each other. They, just like Jews in America don't speak Hebrew to each other. They speak Americanese, right? Or English or French. That Jews who live in other parts of the world basically pick up the local language, and the local language in Babylonia would have been Aramaic. So the reason the Targum was written in Aramaic, it was written to begin with, was for the Jewish people to be able to understand the Hebrew, that they could then read the Aramaic and get a better idea of what the Hebrew was saying. So how accurate the Targum is something of great importance, because Jews were leaning on the Aramaic to read the Bible, just as Jews in the United States or in English-speaking countries or in any foreign-speaking land depend on those translations. And it's important because this, as you understand, this material is profoundly important as to how we live our lives and what we make of our lives and things like that. So, but Zoharai, Zeh Meturgam B'Sheruta. He says, he translates noon as at the meal, right? At the meal. Shehu Lashon Seuda Rishona, because the Sheruta is the first, it has the meaning of the first meal, Belashon Arami, in Aramaic. So they're going to eat, and they used to eat twice a day. That was their custom, not 3 times a day, which is our custom. But they used to have, and that's why on Shabbat, because that was the one day when you had 3 meals, they talk about Suda Shlishit, which would mean the 3rd meal. Under normal circumstances, they would just eat twice a day. So I would have to imagine that they would get up, they would skip breakfast and essentially eat later on towards noon. So, ouvelaz, and in Old French, dîner, dinner. That's the French for it, how we get dinner. V'yesh harbeg b'gemara, and there are many examples of this in the Talmud, in the Gemara, and he gives two examples. Sheda lekalba sherute. He cast to the dog its bread, its meal, essentially, right? He cast to the dog its meal. Betsa achula sheruta. But livtsoa is a verb used to break bread, right? Or to cut bread. He akula sheruta for the entire meal. So, examples. Aval kol tirgum shel soharayim. But in truth, when you look at the word soharayim in Hebrew, tihara, it has to do with midday. And again, tihara is the Aramaic form, soharayim is the Hebrew, and then here the tet and the tzaddik, right? Again, both basically formed the same way. Vayas ha'ish kasher amar Yosef, and the man did according to what Joseph had said. Vayave ha'ish et hanashim beita Yosef, and the man brought the men, okay, in other words, Joseph's brothers, beita Yosef, into the house of Joseph, into Joseph's quarters. And we'll see what happens. I believe we don't have a Rashi on the. Okay, so we're going to go on. Vayiru ha'anashim, and the men were afraid. They became afraid. Ki huv'u beit Yosef, because they were brought into Joseph's house. Vayomru, and they said, or they thought, right? Al devar hakesef, the reason this is happening is regarding the matter of the money hashav ba'amtachotenu batchila, that had been returned into our sacks originally. Anachnu muvaim. That's why we're being brought into the house, into Joseph's quarters. Lehit golel aleinu, and again, the Hebrew here is a little bit challenging, and so Rashi's going to deal with it, right? In other words, to be able to bring charges against us, ulehit napel aleinu, and to literally to fall on us, nafal, but in the sense of to attack us. V'lakachat otanu la'avadim, and to take us as slaves, ve'et chamorenu, and our donkeys. In other words, so understood. Yeah. You know, when you're in a situation where you're totally overpowered by hostile individuals or hostile force. Vayiru ha'anashim, and the men were afraid. Katuvhu b'shnei yudim. So we notice that the way this word is written is vayiru. Look at this, 2 yuds, right? So let's take a look at what Rashi says more. V'targumo udachilu, and we understand this as they were afraid. Dachilu means to be afraid, and that is because the root of to fear is yara, yud resh aleph. A lot of weak letters in that word, but we preserve that second yud in that word to preserve the root of the word. Kihuvau beit Yosef, that they were brought into Joseph's house. Ve'ein derech sha'ar habayim, and that isn't the way other visitors, lishbor bar, or who are those who come, and this is not the way with regards to other people who come to procure grain, lalun beveit Yosef, to spend the night in Joseph's house. But rather in the inns that are in the city, right? When you come to, so what's going on here? They're worried. And they said, She'ein ze ella la'as fam, that the only reason this was happening was in order to gather them together, el mishmar, to put them in prison. Anachnu muva'im, we are brought el toch habayit hazeh, that we are brought into the midst of this house. Lehit golel. So here we have lehit golel. So we know that golel has something to do with rolling, right? Liyot mitgalgelet aleinu. So in other words, to roll over us, alilah takesef, the pretext of the money, uliyota nofelet aleinu, and for them to fall for the reason of it, right? The reason of this money, they should fall upon us. For Onkelos Shetirgame and Onkelos, who translated into the Aramaic Olistakfa alana, right? Those particular words, Hulashon lihit olel. He says that has to do with, right, finding a pretext against us. As we translate into Aramaic the term alilot devarim, words that are a pretext against someone, taskufe milin, right? Words that are a pretext, and there's that taskufe. The Lord tigamo achar lashon hanikra, but we're not saying that he actually translated it the way the scripture actually says it. So leistakfa has to do with to create a pretext, but legolel has to do with this idea of rolling, right, to bringing about. So that's as I understand this. Ulehit golel, so he says, and the word lehit golel, shetirgem lehit, forgive me. So he's now telling us the way that, to the extent that if we look at the Aramaic and it says le'it rav rava, that means to lord over it, lord over us, hu lashon, and this has to do with another aspect of the way gulat hazahav. So we're talking about the golden bowl, all right? But let's go on a little bit. Hatzav, this is Hutzav, this is the name of a person. Galta, which is the queen. So Queen Hutza, He'elta, she went up, something like that. Shehu Lashon Malchut. So the It Rav Rava has to do with the meaning of to lord over us, as opposed to find a pretext. I'm sorry for whatever confusion I was causing in that explanation. Going on. This verse. Vayikshu el ha'ish asher al beit Yosef, and they drew close to the person. They went over to the man who was over the house of Joseph. In other words, Joseph's supervisor. Vayadabru elav petach habayit, and they spoke to him at the entrance of the house, meaning before he actually got them into the house. Right? They said to him as they were entering the house. Vayomru, and they said, "Be Adonai." They said, "Please, my Lord." Yarod, Yaradnu, we went down, we came down, but chila lishbor ochel, originally to purchase grain. And we may have to stop here. Let's see, take a look at the Rashi. Right. Be Adoni. So this word be Adoni, this expression be Adoni means please my Lord, or if you please my Lord, right? Lashon ba'aya v'tanchuminhu. This is an expression of entreaty or supplication. The Lashon Arami, and in Aramaic, we would say, baya, baya, woe, woe. So be and baya, again, supplication. Yarod, yaradnu, indeed we came down. Yerida hulanu. It says, interesting, this is actually a very cool Rashi, how he takes we came down and pushes the meaning further than simply coming down from the land of Canaan, of the land of Israel, down to Egypt. He says, Yerida hilanu. For us, It was a coming down, right, of our status. Regilim hayunu, it was more customary for us, lefarnes acherim, to provide for others. Achshav anu tzrichim la. But now we need you. We need you to provide for us. And the whole notion of having to depend on others in this particular way is humiliating. You might get used to it, but the truth is, it is not something that makes us feel proud of ourselves. And with this, I'm going to stop for today. There. And God willing, we will continue tomorrow morning, God willing. So, David, is that your hand up again?
Sorry, forgot to put it down.
No problem. I just didn't know if you had another question.
I have something from yesterday, and I'm gonna watch yesterday's.
Okay.
Does Rashi deal with the El Shaddai thing?
Yes, he does actually.
Good, because I got a question, so I assume Rashi had a question. So, okay.
Talks about the Shaddai being that it's within God's ability to provide protection and to make sure that Benjamin is not harmed. That
Yeah.
Jacob,
Because using El Shaddai is like powerful and all in. It's everything.
Right.
God does like everything at that point. He can do anything. Yeah.
You'll see what Rashi has to say about
Okay.
it.
I'm excited.
Okay, we're going to stop the recording and please God tomorrow.